Going on to the administration, you would look at the performance in that regard. You will see that you have 69% for the Office of the Secretary, Finance about 88%, Internal Audit 91%, Strategic Management you have about 82, Registrar of Members' Interests is about 105, Legislature Support 60, Projects 81. Now, for the Office of the Secretary, part of the things that are related to there relates to international commitments or undertakings, which were not undertaken in the year, in fact, in the period in question, due to reprioritization on the work that we needed to do in this regard. The second one, when we look at finance and administration, finance and administration have a project that they have to do around the ERP, which in this regard, we have to look at upgrading that system so that it comes to the level where it is. In this year, what they are supposed to do is to do a study that does an assessment. And that study is still underway, and therefore expenditure in this regard has not, come through as yet. And then for internal audit, we're sitting at 91%, and we have said those colleagues that are in the 90s area, we're a little bit more comfortable about them. Strategic management and governance, what we are doing in strategic management and governance, part of the planning has been on events that take place outside, basically to do a strategic plan, strategic view. And when those exercises would happen in the past, we would go out, book a place, do a strategic plan there, stay a day or two, come back. In this instance, all our exercises that we have undertaken, we have done them within the institution. And therefore, we have not had the need to expand in that particular regard. In terms of the work that we needed to do, work is being done in that area. And in terms of filling the vacancies that were there, the vacancies have been filled. So basically, what we are looking at really is savings that we should realize based on the fact that we're not going outside of the institution, which is a huge cost when we have to take a management team that consists of, if I'm correct, about more than 20 people. And if you talk about an extended management team, you're talking about, over, over 50 people that have to go through that particular exercise. So when we have to do meetings, we do them internally. And basically, people have to commute coming through to Parliament as opposed to going outside, sleeping over, and getting expenditure at that level. The Registrar of Members' Interest, in that regard, you will see that we have over expenditure of about 5%, which we think that we can also maintain. Of course, over expenditure, which is in the range of plus or minus 10% within the year, we think it's comfortable. And you will see that when we're looking at projections, it evens out. That is, when you're looking at the second and the third column, we're not expecting over expenditure in that particular area by the year end. Your legislature support services, that relates to the activities that we undertake in implementing the strategic plan of the sector. The sector has a strategic plan that was adopted and approved by the Speakers Forum, meaning all the speakers of the provincial legislatures and the executive authority of Parliament are enjoined in implementing that particular strategy. And the expenditure happens in line with those plans, as it were. But of course, an expenditure level of about 60% is concerning, given the fact that we would want, as a benchmark or the practice that we have put forward, that expenditure must be at 90%. So engagements are happening with the manager responsible in this regard in order to make sure that we improve on our level of performance, which would include that if there are payments that we need to make, we make them now. If we have to pay transfers to legislatures, we make those transfers. If we have to pay our partners and universities in this regard, we make those payments so that we basically make sure that we are at the level where we need to. Now the projects one is at 81%. Now projects is linked, of course, to the work that is done at the level of your programs, meaning the branches would be dealing with specific projects and they'll be insourcing a particular service from the projects office. The expenditure level at this point in time is about 81%. Once again, there's engagement in order to ensure that we up our performance to be above 90%, as it were. On the core business support, moving on to this particular slide that has, once again, the table. We seem to be doing well for the house papers, procedural advice, legal advice, policy advice, research, and we have had improvements, honorable members and honorable co-chairpersons. In the information request, you will see that in the previous quarters, we have had 96% up to 99%. Now we are sitting at 100% at that level. The minutes remains an area of concern, which I'm working on with the acting deputy secretary and the manager, the divisional manager, core business, in order to make sure that basically we improve at that level. As we had said, minutes are core to the work of committees and are core to the work of Parliament, and therefore should sit at 100%. Producing of reports within 8 days. We have now had an improvement from our previous performance in the second quarter that we're sitting at 95%, and we're hopeful that in the next quarter we should be sitting at 100%, honorable co-chairpersons. And Hansard also has seen a significant improvement. In fact, if you look at Hansard, they are the star in terms of this regard, moving from 31% actual performance in 2015 and sitting at 100% in this regard. So the measures have yielded some results at that level. Interpretation, that also still remains a source of concern, remaining at 97%. We would want that to be at 100% because it's key to the work of committees, it's key for the work of Parliament and the work of members in particular. Moving on to the next page, again on program 3. Compliance with PAIA was sitting at 100% in terms of the requests and the responses that we have put forward. Then we have a plethora of models which are related to the oversight model, the oversight and accountability model, the legislature model implementation, and the cooperative governance implementation. Honorable co-chairpersons and members in this regard, I would remind the committee that we had reported earlier on in the previous quarter that we had work done between committees, research, procedural people, legal people, communicators, people from the various offices of elected presiding officers to basically see how best we can improve on our services in this regard. And we have come through together with a report which we are integrating into our work and implementing. Part of the outcome of that, honorable co-chairpersons, was that the way in which we had done things of separating the models was not quite working for us. So in terms of the implementation, working with the Advocate Pindela in this regard, the acting deputy secretary, we basically we have finalized the drafts in terms of the implementation model in this regard. We have also started to pilot in some processes within research and committees in producing revised reports, which hopefully committees are finding perhaps useful, although it's small changes at this level. We have engaged institutions such as universities that have participated in engaging with our staff members and trying to engage and upskill us in this regard. We are also connecting with other state institutions such as Statistics SA, the Monitoring and Evaluation Department, in order to make sure that from the data set we are correct, from the interpretation of the data set we are correct, and also from obtaining the skills within the institution. We're able to build those skills within the institution and collaborate with people that have done work in this particular space so that we can build that capacity. We are sitting at an amber, which is something that really, obviously, from our side, we would want to see it at green so that we can say we're at full implementation at that level. But it's a complex matter that requires not only for us to do work, it also requires us to, we're changing the culture, the mindset in terms of the delivery of service. So it's not just doing the paperwork and having the standards right and having the formats right. It's also then saying the way in which we then produce the reports, the way in which we then analyze the report, and that production and analysis of report happens through the people that we have, which we have to then reorientate so that we can get to the level where at least the members and the chairpersons of committees are happy with the products. Then we have the issue of doing your survey, meaning the population having access to participate in the parliamentary process. That would deal with the public participation processes that we have. In this regard, we're still doing field work in order to do the analysis of the work. It's far advanced, that's why we put it at amber, but it's not quite there so that we can then say it is fully complied with. So it's an area that from our side, as we move on in the public participation space, we will intensify our efforts to improve performance in that regard. On international parliamentary delegation reports submitted, in this particular quarter, we are seated at 93%, which is a drop of about 7% from the previous quarter, where we were at 100%. So I think in that regard, we in fact just have appointed on a permanent basis a divisional manager to help us strengthen that particular area, because that area did not have a divisional manager for quite some time. It has been working on an acting manager who has been doing very well under the circumstances to deliver the service. Right now, we think it's an area that will see more stability because of permanency in that regard. Then on the core business support, moving on to now the budget. We see that on the budget for the Office of the Deputy Secretary, you would know that the Office of the Deputy Secretary, we don't have a full-time Deputy Secretary. So when we see 3% expenditure, it basically means that is expenditure, if you like, of acting, but the actual expenditure for that particular office is not there. The function is performed, of course, by the Secretary of the National Council of Provinces, Advocate Pindela, who is acting as Deputy Secretary. In fact, he is performing both functions of serving as the Secretary to the NCOP and serving also as the acting Deputy Secretary in this regard. We are working to kind of stabilize that area, and hopefully we'll be able to find an appropriate candidate so that we're able then to give attention in that regard. But we're grateful for the work that is done by Advocate Pindela in this regard. Then you have for the National Assembly, we're sitting at about 88%, National Council of Province, 89%, and your international relations and protocol is your 89%, core business support, 90%, and for your information and knowledge services, 91%. You would recall, Honorable Chairpersons, that when we came to present to this committee, one of the things we said we were going to do was to try and deal with reducing printing in this particular, printing outside in the organization. We are now printing almost all of our documents internally except for the bills. The bills are still being printed externally, but all house papers are printed internally, and all other publications that we do are printed internally. So we are just working on making sure that we have that the technical skill of printing the bills internally, and once we have that intact, it means that we will be doing printing internally, and it means that the huge costs that we would get from the activities of the NCOP, the NA, and committees, as it were, will reduce significantly to the extent that we'll be doing the printing internally. Then if we move on then to support services, of course, is the division that the Deputy Secretary Kiawa is responsible for. We have the area which we're working on in your stakeholder management plan. She has presented a plan to me that we have been working on since December. That plan is meant to be finalized by the end of, in fact, by March. So for the quarter in question, it comes in as a red. And one of the issues that contributed to that is that initially we were going to ask a service provider from outside to help us do this particular work. We issued tenders. When what we got as proposals were not acceptable. We then had further discussions with the team of the Deputy Secretary and concluded that it would be better we try and do this thing internally. So at this point in time, she and her colleagues are then leading this particular exercise to try and develop this stakeholder management plan internally, as opposed to taking it externally and dealing with it at that level. Then for client satisfaction level, that is also your annual targets. That will be dealt with at that level. The communication strategy has been completed. We have the first draft, which has been presented to the Secretariat, and that draft is being finalized for onward submission and approval by the Executive Authority. But we have noted it as a yellow because we think we will put it as a green when it's finally approved by the Executive Authority. Then for the target on population being aware, that's also part of the annual target. We do a survey with Makino that would then give us the results at that level. That's what we mean by annual target. And in terms of your universal access, we have seen a slight improvement, which is at 63%. Now, universal access basically speaks to the availability of information through mobile means, that is from your phone, from your devices. So we try and measure then the level of access in that regard. So in terms of the targets that we had set for ourselves, we think we've met that particular target. And then on the client satisfaction survey, that one we also do it as an annual survey. We have started work in that regard, which will then, a report will be due for the third quarter, because what we want to do with that is that we want to produce, when we have produced the annual report, we must compare the annual report with the client survey, which basically says what is the level of satisfaction of members. So when we say something has been done, is good, how do members feel about this particular service? And members would have expressed themselves in the form of the responses in the survey, which will give us then a sense of whether the services that we are providing are indeed what members require and what members need. Then in terms of talent management, I think in that regard, we are sitting, in fact, at about 4.4% in terms of your vacancy rate, as it were, on funded posts, meaning the various posts that are funded are being filled. We are also, on the ones that are remaining, we have prioritized, as the committee advised the last time, prioritize those positions that are related to committees, related to research, which will then be filled in this particular instance, so that we have the researchers, the content advisors, and the committee coordinators at this level. Then for the budget, what we are looking at then for the Office of the Deputy Secretary is at 96%. Human resources is at 64%. 64% because they are implementing a project called Back to Basics, and that project has started. It has not been fully implemented. The payment will happen once it is finalized and realized, and it's a 3 months project. The communications services is at 84%. In this regard, once again, we had a project around your communication strategy. And that project, we have had to sever the relationship with the service provider that was doing that work in favor of us doing work at that level, because we are not quite happy with what we received. For information, communication, and technology, it's at 92%, which is above 90. Member support is at 92%, which is about 90. And institutional support services is about 91%, which is above 90. And that would leave overall the average for this particular area at 85%. Of course, the drawdown there is the 2 areas of human resources and your communications service in terms of expenditure at that level. Then moving on to basically Program 5, which looks at services that are provided for members. In this regard, we have a project that we had spoken about earlier, honorable members, that looks at provision of the integrated service for members. That project is moving. It started very slowly. It has gained momentum, which basically would look at us redesigning the service orientation for this particular area, which the Deputy Secretary is working on with also, once again, there's a divisional manager that has been appointed in this regard, and we're expecting to see results. What we are trying to work on there, honorable members, is to try and provide a one-stop shop for members, so that when members require a service, they don't have to go to the various offices to access that particular service. They must go to one portal, and that portal will then extract the service from within the institution on the basis of agreed standards to members. You know, if you are requesting something, let's say, to be done on your claims, the standard is that that must be done within 2 days. Then those people will then source that, come to the member and say there is a service, or if the service is not provided, and say what is it that is happening about that. Currently, for members, if they want any service, they have to go through various offices to access that service. So that's what we're trying to do at that level. And the one of the handbook for members, I think that we have done, which was published 31st October. It was approved by the presiding officers and is implemented. In terms of the average days of payment, that we have also improved from the last quarter. In the last quarter, I would recall we're at 98%. Now we're back to 100% on the and the reimbursements. And then the payments made in terms of policy, that were also up to date in terms of the performance. The expenditure at that level, we have divided it basically into 2. One is members' facilities. Members' facilities relate to the actual department that then provides for the reimbursements and provision of those services. And then the transfer to political parties is a direct transfer that happens, that we do periodically. And you would see that one is sitting strictly at 99% because it's a straightforward payment, as it were. And the slide 47, which talks about members' remuneration, that is a direct charge that is coming out of there. You will see that is the only area where we envisage a variance. We're envisaging a variance there because, which is something, we are engaging with Treasury in this regard. When we start a parliament, meaning the 5th parliament, there's allowance that is put in place for payment for members who don't come back, right? Now, when we then move on year, in this instance, Treasury has kept that amount year on year. Now, the money that is provided to us in this instance, we can't keep it. We have to return it to Treasury because it's a direct charge. And they are the ones who then determine in this regard, this is the amount that you get, and that amount then goes into the budget. We can't do anything about it. We have had conversations at my level with the DG in this regard to see how is it that we can resolve this issue, because the way it is now, it appears as if there's underpayment, as it were, whereas there isn't underpayment. All the payments have happened correctly, and it's the same amount year on year that comes through. So it's something that hopefully we will resolve with the Treasury in this regard. Then we, in conclusion, what we are looking at, honorable co-chairpersons and honorable members, we have taken guidance from the committee. And on our side, we are looking forward to giving feedback whether the way in which we have presented the report is helpful to members, or we can do further improvements in that regard, because we are striving to align our work with the plans and the reports, as it were, and to make it easier for the committee also to exercise its responsibilities. Secondly, we are continuing to focus on the support that must be provided to members throughout, whether we are talking about work we do in core business, work we do in support services. Our orientation at this point in time is that the work that we do must be member-centric. Basically, it must add value to the work of members at committee level, within the House, and hopefully at some point in time in the work that you do in constituencies, we can also be of value at that level. And then the last thing is that the work that we are doing on our side from a results-based and an outcomes-based orientation is far, far, far from over. We, just to share with the committee, we are at a level where we are, based on the input that we have received from the committee, and our own assessment and analysis, we want to do further work in order to streamline the way in which we articulate the targets. Of course, the difficulty now, honorable members, is that the targets that are there, that are in the APP, we can't change. So we have to work with the targets that are there within the APP. But we are trying to make sure that we report on them in the most manner that will be easier, and in a manner that would make sense and less cumbersome, as it were. So we're looking forward, Chairperson, to receiving feedback from members of the committee and guidance, which, you know, as usual, we will integrate into our work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Secretary, for the report. And exactly, I think that's an opportunity that I will give to members to interact with the reports that you have tabled. Members, can I have indication? Honorable Shal, Honorable, yes, there is and Honorable Waters. Yes, I'll follow the line, Honorable Singh. Thanks. Honorable members, our program doesn't provide for break, and I think we should proceed because given the time pressure. So let's proceed then. Thanks. Honorable Shah.
Thank you, Chairs. Thank you for the briefing and the presentation. Chairperson, if we move to page or slide 23, branch April, December 2016 actuals against budget. Just a few matters. Looking at these figures, the question is whether the budget were adjusted according to the estimates, or were the estimates done according to the adjustments to ensure zero variances. What was the basis for the adjustments? Have these numbers been appropriated per program? in law. What informed the estimated expenditure for the remainder of the financial year? Referring to that specific slide, I think that will go to the CFO. And then, Chair, on the matter of performance against targets, the financial management developed measures to increase efficiency and reduce costs. The lean methodology was submitted to the Secretariat and is currently being updated to address policy and practice. Could the Secretary please provide more detail on this methodology and its implementation? Secondly, sir, Chairpersons, the performance agreement for the accounting officers should have been done by the 7th of April. Has this been completed? If yes, it's fine. If not, why not? And the way forward. Yes. Donor funds of 39.7.
I thought when you say yes, that's an emphasis that you are concluding your tense.
No, that's my own. Ignore the yes. That's my way of speaking sometimes to myself. Donor funds of 39.74 million are not reflected in the report on revenue collection. Could the Secretary address that one? Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Chairs.
Thank you, Honorable Shal. Honorable, yes, Steenhuisen.
Steenhuisen,
Sorry.
said you. Stone, not first. Thank you very much, Chairperson. Just a few questions. I take it we're going to get to the ERP process after, or do you want me to put my questions around that now? The ERP, are we getting a separate standalone presentation on that?
I think yes,
Okay,
Secretary.
great, that's fine. I'll hold
All right.
my questions off for then. Just to understand the relocation of Parliament and the budget for that, I just understand where it's located and how much has been set aside for that and been spent on it to date. I mean, there must be some costs around feasibility studies, etc. Just want to unpack where that is in that budget. If I could get some explanation on the overspending in the Office of the Registrar, what has caused that overspending? I imagine it's a pretty static cost every year. Just understand how we've managed to overspend there. And then just a point again, the same point I make every time we have these presentations is that the way the information is presented makes it very difficult to actually drill down into real performance. So if one looks, for instance, at Program 3 as an example, you've got, that's the legal advice. Now you've got 100% for the last 3 columns. But that doesn't tell us about the quality of the legal advice that's being received. So you may be getting legal advice within 7 days, but if you're losing cases repeatedly, how do you assess the quality of that legal advice? So you've got a green there now, but you're losing cases hand over fist. So it doesn't speak to the drill down into the quality of the performance. It's a tick box. So somebody asks for a legal opinion, they get it within 7 days, but it could be bad advice. And so we have to find a way, I don't know how we're going to do it, we try and have these presentations in a way that actually quantifies performance in a manner that speaks to outcomes rather than inputs. And until we do that, this committee is not actually going to be able to effectively exercise oversight, because I can come and tick every box and say I've complied and I get a green, but at the end of the day, my department's failing in its core function. And I think that's the broader problem that we have here. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Honorable. Honorable Lotas.
Thank you, Co-Chair. If I can just refer to page 23 of the report, where the total budget that's been reported on is 1.852 billion. Yet when you report to Treasury, you report on the 1.659 billion, discrepancy of 200 million. Can you please explain in layman's terms why there's that discrepancy of 200 billion rand, please, so I can understand that. And then as far as the appropriation is concerned, did Parliament appropriate or just allocate the funds received from National Treasury, from National Revenue Fund. Can you elaborate on that? Then with regards to...
Yes. Sorry, Honourable Waters, can you repeat that question?
Yeah.
So that
I can. Did Parliament appropriate or just allocate the funds received from the National Revenue Fund? Then with regards to the adjustments, I see the compensation for employees was reduced from 921 to 910. Why was that reduced? And if you look at capital expenditure, for example, that was increased. Can you please explain those? The adjustments. Why was compensation for employees reduced and capital expenditure increased? Just two more questions, Chair, if I may. Has the Secretary of Parliament signed his performance agreement yet as the accounting officer? And then also the Audit Committee made recommendations for management to focus on several issues. For example, strengthen the performance management and reporting system to ensure quality reporting, etc. Can we have a progress report on those findings, please, as to what Parliament has done as far as to adhere to those recommendations from the Audit Committee? Thank you.
Thanks, Honourable Member. Honourable Singh.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. Some of the questions have been covered, but I just want to hone in on a couple of things, and then maybe the Secretary won't have the answer now. You spoke about taking Parliament to the people and the success of this program, particularly in relation to the Eastern Cape visit. Now, at some stage, can we get an indication of how much it cost, the pre-visits and the visits itself, and whether we got value for money in that regard, meaning did all members of the NCOP and members of Parliament who were supposed to attend that particular TPP. Secondly, on the question of CapEx, just following Honourable Waters, I see something different here, because I note from your economic classifications that you only spend 39.73% of your budget. And I just want to know, what plans do you have to spend all the money, CapEx money? Because in a report that I have, I see it's 39.73. And does the CapEx expenditure include the server? You know, we've been hearing about the server that is going to be updated, but we still know that, you know, the internet services, etc., are appalling in and around Parliament, and there was to be a new contract or, you know, commissioning of a new service provider earlier on this year. What's happened to that? Then on compensation of employees, just following again on Honourable Waters, you know, there's been an underspend. What is the status of and there's another report that we received, Chair, here, which I have, with the heading Labour Report. What is the status of discussions with our staff vis-a-vis performance bonuses, etc., etc.? Because and why are we underspending on compensation of employees, 71%? And then if I can just my memory can be refreshed on the people in the Speaker's office, because we've underspent there, and you say there were 2 people that were dismissed or removed or resigned or whatever the word is. I don't want to put words in your mouth. I mean, we've underspent because 2 people are not there, according to your presentation. And just give us some background to that. And Chairperson, there were issues that were outstanding from the last meeting. Issues which relate to PARMED, issues which relate to tickets for former members. And I see we've received a report, and I think at some stage we need to just go through this report here, because I have some questions relating to this report that we had received earlier on from the Committee Secretary and the Secretary. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Honourable Singh. Honourable Sheikh.
Thank you, Chair. I think some of my questions are covered. However, I thought your underspending on compensation was probably because you didn't give us an increase. Let me just start off. I think one of the things is that you have underspending, But at the same time, you project that in the last quarter you will spend all your money, there will be 100%. I just wanted the rationale behind. I don't know if that was covered by our speaker. The tabling of the government documents, you'd say that it is late. I don't know if you could just explain to us what is the reason for those things to be... the institution support democracy program, I see you have overspent. How do we overspend? Because we obviously don't have, we haven't budgeted, did we take it from somewhere to actually accommodate that? And when there is underspending in a particular, up to the 3/4 or in any of the quarters, how does it actually impact on the quality of or the performance itself? Because I think, yeah, what I find is that internal audit had underspent. And internal audit is quite a very important department, for oversight especially. So I just want to know, would their underspending, whether it had actually impacted on the thing. We also talk about late payments of invoices for radio broadcasting. I want you to tell us if our own SABC has not been providing those invoices timeously to get paid, because generally they should be, providing them, and should have no excuses for that. You talk about political parties funding. This is a little bit out of your performance thing. I just wanted to know whether at some stage maybe, I don't know if it has happened in the past, that maybe we as political parties would be able to get a workshop for us on exactly what happens, what it is used for, what it is not, because some of us really don't know. And it is creating problems for us. This issue of members not returning and money is budgeted for it, surely that is an ongoing process that would be happening for many, many years. So why is it that we haven't taken that into account to try and find a solution to it once and for all, since it is and then finally, the issue of public participation. Whilst we say that there is quite a good response from the public, my one concern in that area is, and I think you'll agree with me, especially in the rural areas and things, the level of education is a serious problem. And my concern is whether we are going down to the level of the people who can understand us, because quite often you find in public participation, you'll find NGO leaders and things that are, participating, and not the people on the ground who want to participate, but because of not being able to comprehend, they don't participate. I'll stop there, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Honorable Member. Honorable Govaza.
Yeah, thank you, Chairperson. Let me just write on the question that was raised by Honorable Singh on taking Parliament to the people. You indicated that was jointly done together with the provincial legislatures. One would want to understand whether the costs were also jointly borne between National Parliament and the legislatures, or it means legislatures were just invited to participate after everything else was arranged by National Parliament, so that we have a clear understanding of what exactly was happening. Secondly, the public participation on the work of the high-level panel. You indicated that the numbers of participants of the public were much larger than had been planned. It would be helpful to know, one, whether Parliament has been assisting ordinary people to participate, and if it has, how much has it spent on that, and just how much has Parliament spent on the work of that high-level panel up to this far. I didn't seem to get that. On slide 23, you, as you report, you're reporting up to Q3, if I understand you properly. You say from April to December. And you are already at, the assumption is that at Q3 you would have spent at least around 75% of your budget. But you indicate you are at 88 already. But then what you are also saying in the same vein, there is likely to be underspending of 99.7 million rand at the end of the financial year. So I'm not quite clear why 88% at this point would look like an overspending already, but you anticipate an underspending at the end of the financial year. And so if you could clarify that. Those are my questions, Chairperson.
Two quick ones, Honorable Shal and then Honorable Steenhuisen.
Thank you, Chair. Advocate Pandela, if I'm correct, on the 9th of March, there will be a debate on taking Parliament to the people in the National Council of Provinces. So that report is available for members also to read. An important focus was also on the education matter challenges in the Eastern Cape. So that debate will be a very important debate. Then lastly, quick one, referring to the tools of trade, chairpersons, for members and staff, target achieved in terms of policy, in terms of deliver. How far are we, referring to previous questions in other structures of Parliament, as we are heading for the fourth quarter? Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I beg your indulgence. My handwriting was so bad that I actually missed the one question I wanted to ask. Full disclosure, you see that. Just in terms of compliance with recruitment, etc., the Deputy Secretary, is he on a signed performance contract, and on what date was that performance contract entered into? Thank you.
Thanks.
In the process, and it doesn't become a party rally. Yeah, how do we ensure, because taxpayers' money is being used, right, that it doesn't become a party rally where it's basically just MECs, chairpersons of committees, or the chairperson of the NCOP speaking, and that all parties participate equally in the proceedings? Because what has happened in the past, they have become party political rallies, and we're using taxpayers' money. Now, I don't mind people having party political rallies at their own expense, but not at the expense of the taxpayer. So how do we ensure beforehand and before the money is approved that the program will reflect the representation in the NCOP? Thank you.
Is there another member who wants to do the quick one? No. I attended a very successful parliament with the people in Eastern Cape, and which practice popular democracy to reach out to as many as possible people, which was a very important session. So I will allow the Secretary and the team to respond.
Thank you, Honorable Co-Chairpersons, and thank you to Honorable Members for the questions. In terms of the budget adjustments or allocations, as it were, I think the same question has been asked by quite a number of members, if I understand well. When you look at the appropriations document, the one that is tabled by the Minister, you will see that in the appropriations document, the Minister basically tabled a budget for Parliament, which is a lump sum. and the minister tabled that budget as a lump sum because at the time, the engagements between that are required by law between the Minister of Finance and the Executive Authority of Parliament had not occurred. They then tabled the budget as they had basically prepared it, which was a lump sum. Now, in terms of the FMPPLA, honorable members would recall that for Parliament, the executive authority, in fact, the Treasury, is the executive authority. That is the Speaker and the Chairperson acting jointly, as per the FMPPLA. That is in line and consistent with the principle that is there in the Constitution that basically ensures the separation of powers. And it ensures that Parliament and provincial legislatures are able then to get their allocations as they request, and the allocations that would be accommodated by the fiscus. The process of accommodating the allocations is one where the minister responsible, and that is for Treasury and the Executive Authority in the form of the Speaker and the Chair in Parliament, and when you talk about provinces, it will be the Speaker and the provincial treasuries, need to have a meeting that then leads to the final allocation, as it were. Now, we have then, at that time, in line with our engagements with our colleagues then in Treasury, they have indicated that we'll give you this particular lump sum based on what they had prepared, which was not what we had expected, which was not what we had requested. Now, I'm referring that because we had indicated that one, Honorable Chairperson, when we presented our budget to the committee, to indicate that this was a request we made, this is what we received from Treasury, this was a shortfall from what we had. And the shortfall was necessitated from National Treasury, I think, based on the conditions that prevailed at the time. Now, then in terms of our own act, which is the Financial Management of Parliament and Provincial Legislatures Act, the Treasury in this instance, that is Parliament's Treasury, then made the relevant allocations, which would then say, from the lump sum that you have, this is what is going to go to each and every program that is there within the institution. Now, this was done based now on this budget that we received from Treasury, which is not necessarily the budget that we had submitted at the time. So, in short, from a legal and a compliance perspective, there's full compliance at that level. But from a perspective of Parliament and National Treasury working together to, agree on the resources that are required for Parliament, that area required a lot to be worked on. Now, subsequent to that, I can report to this committee that the Speaker and the Chairperson have met with the Minister of Finance. And they have discussed what needs to be done. They have included in that meeting the speakers of the provincial legislatures who attended that meeting so that we can then finalize how this process must unfold and work. They have also subsequently asked the Secretary with his counterpart, the Director General responsible for Treasury, to work with, that is on my part, work with the provincial secretaries, the Director General, work with the provincial treasuries in order to make sure that we facilitate this process far much more better and get to a point where Parliament and provincial legislatures, or if you like, the legislative sector, is able to assert itself properly in terms of the resources that it requires. But of course, National Treasury also have the same responsibility from their side, because they are the holders of the fiscus, and they have to mediate in any event on who gets what from the same fiscus. So I think that area, we are pleased to report, Honorable Co-Chairpersons, that it's under control at this point in time. And in fact, we are working between the sector and the treasuries on a protocol document that would enable the implementation of this without taking away the role of Parliament and provincial legislatures, as it were. So to come to this particular budget, the authority of Treasury in this regard, the Treasury of Parliament, was then exercised to then distribute the budget. But that was done, recall the system that we're using of planning is the one of zero-based budgeting, meaning you plan on the basis of the strategy, what you need to achieve, and on the basis of that, you have indicated the requests that you want then in terms of the resources, and resources then have to be allocated. In this instance, the practicality of what had to happen is that we had to cut budget because what was requested and what we have were at variance. So we then had to say, well, there are certain things that needed to be cut so that we can be in line with the budget. We can't spend on the basis of the budget that we don't have. We have to spend on the basis of the budget that we have. Then in terms of the question on the lean methodology, and I'm going to make an assumption that it talks about, because we have not necessarily made reference to the lean methodology ourselves, but I'm sure it talks about the fact that we were saying the budget of Parliament has been shrinking year on year, right? Based on, if you look at your real income, right? It has been shrinking year on year, and we have additional cuts that were placed. In this year, it was 33. Next year, it will be 102. The following year, it's expected also to be at 100,000. So we are having engagements with Treasury in order to stabilize that one, to say if you cut us, it will be difficult for us to be able to perform our responsibilities. And those discussions are honest between the two parties, and we're engaging in a manner that is constructive at that level. We have not come to something that we can refer to as an agreement that we can then table to say, okay, now this means this and that in terms of rands and cents. But it's work that the presiding officers of both the National Parliament and the provincial institutions are working with the National Treasury and the Provincial Treasury so that we can basically have a good handle of the situation, and also do so in a manner that is responsible, and that does not seem to say that Parliament or provincial legislatures are not affected by what is happening in the country and what is happening outside of the country. So on the lean methodology, we have, if I were to call that, but I wouldn't like to use that term or to own that term. We have said on our side, we have had to look at our own strategy and our own budget and say, okay, given what we have, the realities of the resources on the ground, where can we cut, right? Meaning, where are the inefficiencies in the organization? So we tried to go back and look for inefficiencies in the organization. We tried to go and look back for areas of improvement where we can do the same thing with less costs. For instance, if I were to make an example, we have a strategic planning session, but we are not going outside, right? So all of that expenditure that is $1 million or so, it's now not going to be affected, but we will have the strategic. The flowers that are provided daily, we cut down on the flowers. You can do that for maybe the big events, fine. We have said in terms of the catering, let the catering, be up to scratch in terms of the numbers. You must not get catering which basically for 10 people, which now caters for 50 people and all that kind of a thing. So there are quite a number of measures that we have put in place. We have looked at travel and say, how can we improve around issues of travel? When we look at our own situations on travel, we realize that part of the reason why we get charged more is because we don't do things quite early. So when you buy tickets late, then the cost is very high. So now we're trying to streamline the system so that we are able to travel, but you can do things much earlier, save on the cost, both of the flight and accommodation. We have said we have looked at the posts, right? There are about, in fact, over 300 posts that we have frozen, right? And that process, we had to engage in an exercise with all the line managers and ask people, do you need this post and so forth? And there are some posts that have been there vacant for quite some time, right? Others more than a year, 2 years or 3 years. Obviously, if you have a post that you have not filled for more than a year, 2 years, 3 years, we asked people nicely, to basically then continue to provide the service the way they've been providing it. It's not easy. It's difficult because in many instances it means people have to do more with less. We have then said, let's look at improving the way in which we do our businesses, management, and generally the staff, and try and improve some of those. So on our side, really, it's a strategy that looks at the efficiencies within the system, a strategy that looks at effectiveness. We have a third element that we said we are looking of saying there's not going to be expenditure for budgets, votes. Basically meant, if we talk rands and cents for Parliament, we're not going to be having events happening here, and therefore the revenue for those events went down because they were doing the events here. So we had to look then on, okay, how else then do we generate the revenue and keep up to the level that would be. So we're looking at a number of strategies in that regard, including considering reopening the memorabilia, where we can sell memorabilia to our guests and our visitors, who can then hopefully help us to generate some income. Of course, the income that will be generated there is not going to be a lot, but it will help to close some of the gaps. So that's the issue really at that level. It's not the question of we're reducing the costs by any means, and even if the services suffer. So we try and ask people to continue to provide the service, but do so in an innovative manner and do so with less costs. Then in terms of the performance agreement, the performance agreement was prepared and is ready, but has not yet been signed. It's a subject that I'm engaging with the executive authority in this regard. If I answer the corresponding question, whether the deputy secretaries and all the other staff members have, and in fact the approach that we are moving on in that regard is an approach that says for the year that is coming, we want performance agreements to be finalized before the year starts, because we already have the budget, right? We already have the annual performance plan, right? So the performance agreement for the year in question comes from those two main documents. So that is something that is uppermost, I know, in the minds of the presiding officers. And it's something that we are hopeful that as we try then to fix our space in that area, we start on a clean slate in the year in the coming year, which is the year 2017, 2018. We want to make sure that everybody's performance contracts are prepared. The performance agreements for the secretary, they've prepared the performance agreements for the deputies. They have assisted and they are assisting the deputy secretaries to prepare performance agreements for the chairperson asked the administration to look at this. We have done an initial study, what we call rebasing, the old study. Remember, there was a study that was done in 2004, and that study basically had those figures of the past. So we had to now ask somebody to come say, look, can you please once again look at this study, rebase those particular figures, and they have done that particular study. And we now have moved into the second assignment, which is basically to look at what we call a socio-economic study. That would look at what is the benefit of Parliament being in Cape Town, compare it against the benefit of Parliament being in elsewhere. Compare it against the benefit of Parliament being elsewhere. So, because that study will then help in terms of, doing because there hasn't been a study that looks into the economic impact of Parliament being in Cape Town. In fact, we have, a reference that says some companies have moved here because Parliament is here. Some organizations have moved here because Parliament is here. There's a corresponding business of Parliament being here because you have members of Parliament and so forth. But there hasn't been a scientific study that has been done to look at the full impact thereof. So we'll be asking somebody to look at that. And the costing there so far, the expenditure will be, I think, in the region of, I think if we combine the two, I think about 6.5. Meaning the initial study that was done and this particular study. What we are preparing for, Honorable Co-Chairpersons, is for a report to be tabled to the Executive Authority. The Executive Authority will, of course, embark on two related processes that we think are crucial. One is that, of course, there needs to be a process of engagement and consultation within Parliament. So there will be that process. That process must be informed by credible scientific data, evidence-based information that says this is the situation, these are the circumstances, so that that structure, which consists of parties, of members, can then assist in the decision-making process on what would then happen. Then there's also a process of engagement between Parliament and the relevant department. In this instance, in fact, there are about two. It's Treasury and the Department of Public Works, who, as you would know, they're the ones who are responsible for our premises and our accommodation. And as such, they have the budget for that. They know what are the true costs of running Parliament here in terms of the pressings, what are the true costs of running the residences where members stay and so forth. So we're working with them in that regard so that we have a better understanding. And all of those activities at this point, honorable members, are investigatory measures that will then ensure that there's proper decision-making at that level. We don't have the results of the socio-economic study, as it were. So when it does come through, we'll be able then to take it through the appropriate processes. The donor funding that is there, the way we report currently is that we report off budget. They're about, in fact, on the high-level panel, right? On the question of the high-level panel, we report there are three partners that are engaged in funding for the project. It's Parliament, which at this point we fund the project at about 6 million. The UNDP has contributed about 1.5, and the EU has contributed about 3.6 million for running of that particular exercise. And we are trying to engage extra funding from a number of other sources so that we can then continue with the activities of the high-level panel. But honorable members will recall that when you read the Constitution, it talks about two things. It talks about when you talk about lawmaking, it's two. It says Honorable members have a responsibility of passing the laws, and they have a responsibility of making sure that the laws are implemented. Buttressed with that is the issue of oversight, meaning the question of reviewing legislation is a primary responsibility of this particular body at some point in time to deal with. So this exercise, I can only see it coming back to this particular structure, so that this particular structure, that is the Parliament as a deliberative body, is able then to deal with those issues, and we're able then to infuse that way of working in our normal business, because going forward, we are not going to be having panels that review from time to time. We are going to have a process internally that takes into consideration the current processes of members. And of course, on that score, honorable members, I would remain guided as an administrative person and a non-policy person, guided by the policy structures on what happens in that regard. On the issue of overspending, not only in the office of the registrar, the overspending that happens, I mean, because it's about 5%, you look at two areas. Overspending would happen because invoices that were supposed to be submitted for the period that has passed get submitted in the current quarter. And secondly, meaning also when you then do what you need to do in that particular area at that level, then you get into the region of overspending. But we are not concerned because this is for the quarter. It's not for the entire year. For the rest of the year, we think we will still be within a budget accordingly at that level. So we are not envisaging that particular area of the Office of the Registrar overspending at that level. Then on Program 3, I mean, in terms of the quality of report, we agree totally with Honorable Steenhuisen in this regard. I think it's a point we have made ourselves to basically say we need to basically move to the results base. In fact, that's why we provide that diagram in the beginning that talks about policy priority and the outcomes, because we are not yet there in terms of talking about the outcomes. At this particular point in time, if you take the example made by Honorable Steenhuisen, is a very correct one, and it's a question that we are grappling with when I engage the Honorable Advocate, in fact, sorry, Advocate Pindela in this regard. And Madame Resida Bex, who has a responsibility here, and Advocate Adkari. So we engage on exactly the same issue, that granted we are doing very well in terms of submitting the advice on time, but we need to look at the issue of the quality, or if you put it differently, we need to look at two issues of the costs, there too, meaning the reputation for some judgment, because it's not necessarily only the numbers. In some instances, one case can give you a bad image at that level. So, and if you do the number calculation, basically it may not give you a proper perspective. So we are looking into that area, and in fact, it's one of the things that we are working with the audit committee that are also seized with that particular space, because they are looking at it from the question of managing the risk. So you look at the question of the risk in terms of, if you lose these cases, what is the risk to your business? What is the risk to the organization? What is the risk that is financial? So we agree 100%. Honorable Chairperson, there's a question I sort of missed that talks about, that Honorable Waters asked, talks about discretion. I can't quite remember the entire question. But if I were to continue to answer the others.
Secretary, just before you respond, I do not know if members will be comfortable, because we'll have time pressures later if we move in the pace. Some of the issues should not be so detailed,
Okay.
but also there's an outstanding matter that we said you want to flag on the Parliament Enterprise Resource Planning System. So if members would agree, maybe as you respond later, you just provide that report. It's a separate
Yes,
report,
yes.
but okay, let's leave it at that. Conclude the responses, maybe.
Mayor,
Yes.
I think, Chair, we need to interrogate this report properly. There's a lot of information. And if we need to have another meeting with that report that you just mentioned, what the ERP and the human resources organogram, then we must do that, but after the SABC meeting, please.
Okay, well, let's proceed. Yeah, if we are unable to handle all the reports, of course, they will be deferred to the next meeting. All right, that's in order. Thanks very much. Proceed, Secretary.
Thank you. If I miss any other question, I think you will remind me. But I think it was the first question you asked.
Discrepancy in the budgets. You're reporting to us in the 1.8 billion, but you report to Treasury in the 1.6 billion. And I was asking, why is there a discrepancy of 200 billion rand? And where's that money coming from? Million. Oh, million, sorry, not billion. Okay, yeah, true. Okay, million. I beg your pardon.
Thank you. I think that one we'll come back to it with the CFO. I think, Chairperson, I did answer the one on appropriation and the adjustments, how the appropriation and the adjustments happen. The adjustments for this year, Parliament made submissions on the adjustments, but we were not given the...
Chair, so the Secretary, sorry,
Yes,
did explain how Treasury allocated the budget, right? And the process around that. But he hasn't explained the discrepancy of the 200 million. Where's that money from? How do please?
Okay, Secretary.
Yeah, we'll come back to that one. I've indicated honorable co-chairs with the CFO because it's specific about the numbers. But moving on to the other questions that were asked related to appropriation, I think that one has been answered. The adjustments, we have not had adjustments for Parliament because the adjustments would follow the same process that everybody else follows. We have made representations to Treasury. They were not accepted. So Parliament, if you go through the adjustments appropriation, you will not see vote 2 as being allocated anything at that level. The only thing that I can only think of what is referred to as adjustments is the allocations as they are, which we have responded to. And the performance agreement one, we have responded to that. The one from the audit committee, the audit committee raised a number of issues which were the same issues as what the Auditor General raised. They were related to us improving the performance information, which is the same discussion that the committee raised in this meeting and the previous meetings, which related to how we capture, firstly, some of the targets, how we report on those targets, and the Auditor General and the Audit Committee were then also raising issues about us capturing the evidence, right, in order to prove that certain things have happened. Now, in this instance, we're having an Audit Committee this month, and we have had one the previous quarter. We have given representations on work done. Now, there are 3 actors in this area. It's the internal audit that is looking at the matter. It's the audit committee and the Auditor General that will come in this regard. The internal audit is satisfied that the measures that were identified by the Auditor General and the audit committee have been dealt with satisfactorily. And they will be issuing that kind of report to the next audit committee meeting that is taking place. And of course, the audit committee will express itself on that report and indicate whether it's happy or not. Then the next layer will be the Auditor General will then have to come back and say, we raised these things last year, have they been attended to satisfactorily? And they mainly, as I was indicating, were relating to the way in which we capture work done, because we had an unfortunate situation of doing what I refer to as underreporting. We do a whole lot of work, but we don't capture the evidence of the work that we do, and we don't report on it. And as a result, of course, if you don't report on it and you can't prove that you have done something, it means you have not done it in terms of clear auditing terms. So it's an area that we have dealt with. It's the one, Honorable Co-Chairpersons, that enables us to come up with those graphs that have a number of the histogram. Because from that perspective now, we're able to trace even ourselves before internal audit comes to say, we think we're at 98%, we think we're at 100%, and so forth. So that bit is sorted out. That's the bit that the audit committee was concerned about. That's a bit that the Auditor General was also concerned about, which we think we have sufficiently addressed that. But we have not addressed, I mean, we are ready now to go on and address the issues that Honorable Steenhuisen is raising, which then will move us into the result space and the outcomes space. In fact, if you look at this report, what we try to do, Honorable Chairperson, the first part of the report, we try then to basically give sense to this data that we have, to say these are the goals and this is what we are doing in this particular area. But of course, we have to find a most appropriate way of indicating the successes that Parliament as a whole achieves in that regard. I don't think I can say comfortably that we are quite there, but I think it's something that we are working on. Then on taking Parliament to the people, in terms of the figure, sorry. I'm sorry, Chairperson. I have lost my document here, but the CFO and the Secretary of the Acting Secretary will assist me. But you would recall that for taking Parliament to the people, firstly, there are a number of questions that arose there. The first one is, are we sharing the costs with the provinces? The answer is yes. We shared the costs with the provinces, meaning the actual amount that we budgeted, if I'm correct, Advocate Pindela, was about 17, 18 million for the event. And I think if I recall the document that was submitted, it's about 11 million that we spent from Parliament, meaning that we have saved about 6 million from that particular exercise working with the province. So that arrangement has worked for us in terms of sharing the cost. And then secondly, in terms of the content, the feedback we get from the members and those that are in the province and at national is that it has been a useful exercise, including the participants. They have thoroughly been able then to address the issues, because in some of these events you will find that there are issues that are raised that relate to province. And the province, if it is not there in full force or officially, is not able to attend to the issues. So when the province is there, the provincial legislature is able then to attend to issues. And if the provincial MECs are also there, they're able to attend to issues so that they can deal with the matter. The question that was asked correspondingly, Chairperson, by Honorable Waters about the making sure that the event is not a party, we agree completely there. In fact, for Parliament, as honorable members would recall, when Parliament sits, when I mean Parliament, including the two houses and so forth, the idea is that those that attend, they do so in a manner that does not basically resemble a party-related event. Of course, on our side, and I know the Honorable Chairperson is working on this thing with ourselves in order to make sure, which we will take forward the view of the committee, so that when we organize with the relevant parties, we will then put forward that particular perspective which we agree to, that an event of Parliament is an event of Parliament, and therefore should resemble that. So we'll work with the parties to make sure that we achieve that particular objective. The question of whether of assisting ordinary people, and particularly in the rural areas, when we do taking Parliament to the people, we have two stages, in fact, quite a number of stages. There's a pre-stage where we do public education workshops. We do so also when we have to do PPP exercises for bills. I would also remind honorable members of the committee, through you, co-chairpersons, that Parliament also has parliamentary democracy offices that it's established in order to deal with that particular aspect of areas that are not easily reached. I have had the opportunity to visit the two parliamentary democracy offices, the one in the Northwest and the one in the Northern Cape, which really are doing quite a lot of work, working with local government, working with the provincial legislatures in order to deal with and address some of the concerns that the honorable member is raising. So we quite agree at that level. It's part and parcel of our planning. The key issue, when I have met with staff members at that level, they've complained with lack of resources and so forth, given the vast area that they have to cover. They have raised issues around collaboration, stronger collaboration with provincial legislatures, which we have taken up with provincial legislatures in order to assist in that regard. They have raised issues on collaboration with local government, which we have raised also that with the relevant structures of local government. They also raised issues on collaborating with members of parliament when they come into the area, so that they can then use those particular offices much more effectively. And in some instances, there are clear examples of work that has been done in those areas. So I think the simple issue is more can be done, because we only have covered 3 areas, because the third one is in Limpopo. I haven't had an opportunity to visit that one in order to familiarize myself with the lay of the land and the area. In terms of the tools of trade, we have completed the policy in this regard. What we are coming up with in that space is that that the arrangements that you have as honorable members is individual arrangements with the service providers. So individual members will then have arrangement with quite a number of service providers, which basically puts us at a serious disadvantage as an institution. So we have approached the service providers, all of them, and have indicated to them that Parliament is desirous of managing those contracts on behalf of members. And of course, one of the things that we are looking for is benefit in terms of economies of scale, so that we can get much more better service, much more better support. And we think if honorable members deal less with those issues, they have more time now to focus on the business at hand, and Parliament can then deal with the support that is required at that level. So we had to then start from the beginning, which is the policy space. So from our side, administratively, we have completed doing the policy work in that regard. That would enable that to happen. Of course, it will be taken through for further engagement and consultation with parties. When parties agree, then the executive authority, having taken into consideration all of those inputs, will then authorize the policy, which will then make it easier for us to then implement this particular policy, which we think will help because the service providers have also been very enthusiastic, all of them. We have had discussions with all of them where they've indicated what else can they do which they were not doing, meaning they will provide more value addition service to members in this regard. So that's the work that has been done in the quarter in question. In this particular quarter, we are then trying to make sure that we have approvals of the policies throughout the institution. In terms of staff, the update on labor. We have consistent engagements with labor. The bargaining chamber, you would recall the last time when we were reporting, I think in this committee, the engagements at the bargaining chamber were not quite happening. Right now, those engagements have resumed. So there's engagement and communication between management and the union within the bargaining chamber dealing with issues, meaning that the situation has normalized at that level. It doesn't mean that parties agree on all the issues, but it has normalized at that level. The second issue, honorable members would recall that there was an intervention that was made by the Speaker and the Chairperson together with the President of NEHAU, which led to them assigning the Deputy Secretary, the Deputy General Secretary of NEHAU, together with myself, to oversee the process of engagement. Now, that process of engagement includes various structures within NEHAU, from the province, region, and local, who are working very closely with the management team to work out a number of issues in that regard. Now, the question of performance, bonuses and all of that is a matter that when the committee was dealing also with the annual report of the previous financial year, which you would recall that annual report indicated that our level of performance was at 46, if I'm correct, I think 46%. Which was not, very good at that level. So that was the one issue that the committee stressed on making sure that performance bonuses are performance related. And in this instance, of course, as an institution, in the year in question, we have been found wanting. Then the second issue that, of course, was at play, which is an issue, is the one of the reduction of our budget, which significantly impacts on us. Now, all of those are engagements that are taking place between ourselves and labor. On my side, I think the comfortability, the source of comfort that I can give to the committee is that there's communication, there's engagement with the parties, and it's open. And my sense when I've attended the meetings, because I've been in some of the meetings, is that it has been good engagement where parties have been open to one another in this regard, which is what you want in order to put matters forward. Honorable Chairperson, I am not sure whether I've left anything out, but I've tried to answer all the questions. If there's any, I can provide the responses.
Yes, Secretary. I think Honorable De Beer has drawn my attention on the issue of tools of trade for staff. I think based on specific experience on the support of committees. But also, you said the CFO, or still if the CFO has to cover some issues, is welcome. Yes, Honorable Sheikh.
The issue of the political parties funding policy workshop, if you could just
okay.
say. But Chair, there's something very, very important that I meant to ask as well, is with the issue of whether Parliament pays for this accommodation that we occupy in all these parliamentary villages. Is it part of your, I would just like to know what's going on there.
The Honorable, just before you, Honorable Singh, there was an issue also I noted. There was an issue that was raised on the compensation of employees reduced, yet the CAPEX budget increased. Oh, I'm not, yes. that issue, if you can clarify. Honorable Singh?
It's related to capex of 39,73, and then your server and the capital expenditure, and also the Speaker's office. I didn't get a response to that one. The underspend there. Thank you.
If I start with the last one, the Speaker's office, if I'm correct, you will be referring to the Treasury office, which has 0, right? In that instance, there is no person there. The functions around Treasury at this point in time, support is provided through the Office of the CFO in order to make sure that we provide that relevant point in time. We on consideration indicated that that's a service that can still be provided without necessarily filling that particular post. Then in terms of the tools of trade, the CFO will answer the one on CAPEX. Then in terms of the tools of trade for staff basically are provided with tools of trade. In fact, when I joined, one of the things that we changed was that tools of trade used to be regarded as a benefit, right? So a cell phone and so forth, which will be linked to rank and so forth. So we changed that. We said, a cell phone is, and having a laptop and all of that, those must be related to the type of job that you do and what you require. So based on the plans and the budgets that people have in the various programs, we then provide those services. Meaning, if I put it differently, the various section and divisional heads would plan for, we are going to get these kinds of tools, these kinds of resources, and then they work together with the CIO in order to procure the services. Now, one issue that probably may be there, which we are working on now, is that our policy had longer lifespan for tools of trade. So we would keep computers for something like 7 years. Now, the standard industry practice is that a computer would have a lifespan of about 3 years, right? And of course, that argument that I'm putting forward has implication for costs also. So we have to manage coming down from the 7 years into this particular 3-year cycle, which we will do so on a progressive basis, so that we're able then to provide the appropriate tools of trade. From the policy perspective, the staff that may not have tools of trade would have to engage with myself and engage with the line managers. But there isn't a policy preventative matter, because that's why we shifted to the issue of tools of trade. In fact, we had also approved a policy together on the same basis as the one that is done for members for staff. That says now we will provide these tools of trade for the following, categories, and those categories really is job related. It's not hierarchy based, as it were. It's per function and so forth. So it's a matter that line managers would deal with. I don't know whether I'm forgetting. CFO. I think if we can answer the one on the capital expenditure. If we can answer the one on capital expenditure, and there was a question on non-returning members. Not sure whether okay.
You wanted to do a follow-up? Yeah, I just want to do two follow-ups. The one was on the issue around the Office of the Registrar. Now, the Secretary said that the overspending related to invoices. Now, I imagine those are legal invoices, and that was the unusual expenditure there, is that for the first time in a long time, that office went to court. And it is my information that the previous registrar was advised not to proceed to court by legal services, and yet chose to pursue the case. I want to know if there's a potential of recovery of that as fruitless and wasteful expenditure against the particular former employee or not. But I mean, there has to be a way, certainly, for there to be some oversight by this body about what goes to court and what doesn't go to court, and what should be settled and what shouldn't be settled, because we're going to end up with oversight in other departments. The other thing I just want to follow up on is the Secretary's indication around the ongoing dispute around performance bonuses. It's my understanding that that matter is not near finalization yet, and that there's still a great deal of unhappiness amongst employees in the organization. It's continuing to hamper performance and the internal climate that the audit committee's identified as well. So can we have a definitive answer about how far we are to resolving that particular matter?
Okay, thanks. Honorable Singh.
Yeah, Chairperson, sorry to come in again. I thought Honorable Steenhuisen would have asked this one on the relocation. Can we have some idea of the time frame that has been put to this report being tabled before the Executive Authority, and whether in compiling this report there will be consultation with us as well as members who benefit from whether we are in Cape Town or Durban or wherever it is, but just a time frame. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Waters.
Thank you, Chair.
And Honorable De Beer lastly.
Just a quick one on the performance agreement. The Secretary said that the agreement was ready but not signed. Can I take it, am I correct in assuming that the Secretary signed performance agreements for 2015 and 16? He's just talking about the performance agreement for 2017? Or is he talking about an agreement from when he was first employed from the 1st of December 2014? I just need clarity on that, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Honorable Shah.
Chair, I believe it is important that we also get a progress report on the recommendations by the audit committee. There were certain findings that on a quarterly basis, this committee get a report. In terms of the monitoring on that side and this side, we have a tick box, and you tick. Yeah.
See it so that Secretary will deal with the other questions.
Okay, thanks,
Yes.
Chairpersons and honorable members. The capital expenditure largely relates to the projects on video broadcast and My Parliament, which we project by the last quarter of the financial year. They should be fully implemented and paid. That's why there is that projection of that amount. And then there was also a question which was asked on the discrepancies between the budget that we reflect to Treasury. And it is very much true, Chairperson, that there is that discrepancy. But what causes that is mainly because the total budget for Parliament in terms of Section 16 is 2.382 billion. Now that includes your unspent funds of the previous financial year, and it also talks to the question of the 39 million of the donor funds. The difference between the two is almost 193 million, made up of those two numbers. Why is it like that? Parliament reports to this committee as well as the Executive Authority on the total budget, which includes even own revenue. However, National Treasury's in-year monitoring process is mainly on cash, and that only talks to the appropriated funds, which is 2.189 billion. Thanks.
Thank you, CFOO. Before that, Honorable Coleman.
Thank you very much, Honorable Co-Chair. My apologies for arriving late. Just on this own revenue issue and question related to direct charges and so forth, I just want you to give us a whole picture of the own revenue collected. I know in some document that I've read, it's falling also, the donor funding is falling under that. And then you also have sales by market establishment. I think that is something like that. Can you just give us a picture so that we understand that 2 billion that you're talking about vis-a-vis the 1.659, which is also as per adjusted 75% amount. I think if we can get a clear picture, I think members will be aware of what is coming from where, so that we don't keep belaboring on this particular point. I feel the information is not enough, Chair. That's why it's not quite clear.
Thanks. Let's allow for responses. Thanks. Thank you, honorable co-chairs and honorable members. The decision to go to court or defend or prosecute anyone institutionally is not taken by divisional managers. They would make recommendations. The recommendations ultimately have to come to the secretary, who then has to make a recommendation to the executive authority on whether to proceed on this or that matter. And we would do so on the basis of information that we get from all those involved, which would include legal services, which will include the divisional manager responsible, the acting deputy secretary, myself, and the affected area of work. So it's not a decision that is made by an individual who says, I will take this matter to court. So the expenditure in that regard, just to give an assurance to the committee, it was in line with those acceptable processes within the institution. When would the occasion arise when Parliament would then claim from the individual? If the individual acted by themselves, right, and they didn't act within the authority of the institution, then in that instance, they would have done their own action. And as the accounting officer, I would then have a responsibility to make sure that that relevant staff member is disciplined, and we then have the appropriate recovery. In this instance, all of those measures happened accordingly in line with a policy. The question of the performance bonus, I think the question, if I understand it well, it says whether we can say with definitive when the matter will be finalized. We have reported to the committee that there are discussions that are happening at the bargaining chamber. The bargaining chamber will engage and finalize the matters at that level. It will be difficult, Honorable Chair, at this point in time on my part to indicate when that would be. But what the guarantee I can give to the committee is, based on the concern raised by the Honorable Member, is that the processes of labor relations, we would want to see them at normal level. So where parties discuss, meaning labor will have issues they put on the table, management will have issues they put on the table, they engage as they are supposed to engage in any event. On some issues they agree, on some issues they don't agree, they have a few more meetings until such time that they agree. And of course, you don't want that process to spill over into disrupting the work of Parliament. So on our part, we think the process is not there because we're working hard, both sides, which is an important thing to make. That is not only management that is working hard in that regard. Both parties are working very hard in order to make sure that they deal with these matters in a manner that satisfies all, and secondly, in a manner that is responsible and does not affect the business of the House. So that's where we are now on that issue of performance bonus. Then in terms of the relocation time frame, the project, if I recall, is about 3 to 6 months. The socio-economic study, it's a 3 months, it's a 3 to 6 months study, because we have looked around to see if anybody had done the study. Apparently, nobody had done such a study. There are some studies that were done. For instance, DPW did it from their own perspective. So we figured from Parliament we need to take the consideration of members in its totality, of Parliament in its totality. So we thought, let's do something that at the end of the day, when there are questions asked specifically about Parliament, then we can respond to that. So we have appointed a company which has started to look at that particular study. So we are hopeful that within that period of 3 to 6 months, then they will be done. Once they are done, we'll be ready then to engage, on a more educated basis with the DPW, as it were, and inform the processes that need to unfold in that regard. In terms of the performance agreement for 2015, I think that's the first one was signed, right? The 16-17 not yet signed, right? And the 17-18 is the one that we have prepared also, which we are saying, we would want, learning from our experiences broadly within the institution, we would want that to be signed before the beginning of the 17-18 financial year. Because our understanding, what we realized within the institution, the logical framework of the accounting officer signing and everybody else signing was not established. So we wanted to establish that particular logical framework. And in terms of review, you want also the same thing, meaning you are not going to have a situation where there are plans that are not reflected in the rest of the organization. When you then have all these plans that come from the APP, that come from our budget, they'll be reflected in the rest of the organization. When you do reviews also, it's the same thing. You are not going to have a situation where the secretary says, well, I am good, I work very well, and so forth, but the rest of the people are useless. You are going to link the performance of the institution with that of the secretary and the rest of the people within the organization. So when there's performance within the organization, you can trace it from the top right up to the bottom, as it were. So that's the system that we are putting in place, and the logic that we have all agreed upon. We have engaged our management in that regard. We have engaged staff to say we need to get to that level. If we were to do a parallel for that kind of approach. And then CFO, I think on the question asked by Member Coleman, through you, Honorable Co-Chairpersons.
Honorable Waters, is it linked to the Met? Okay, yes.
Chair, I'm quite shocked by the reply of the speaker. He says he hasn't secretary. Sorry, he hasn't. He said he hasn't signed his performance agreement for the financial year 16-17. Now the year finishes the end of March. There's like 6 weeks to go, right? Now, if you look at the Financial Management of Parliament Act, Section 8(1) and 2, well, 8(1) says the executive authority and the accounting officer must conclude a written performance agreement for the accounting officer annually. And point 2 says the performance agreement referred to in subsection 1 must, A, be concluded within a reasonable time after the accounting officer is employed, and thereafter within 1 week after the start of each financial year, 1 week. So this should have happened in April. It hasn't. And it is totally unacceptable that this has not happened. And if I could latch on to that So we're in contravention of our own act here, which is very serious. Was the if I could ask through you, co-chair, did the secretary receive any performance bonuses for this financial year, 16, 17 or all? And if so, how was his work assessed if there was no performance agreement in place? Thank you.
Well, I think we must, I don't know, because the secretary reported gave the current state, and I believe that the co-chairs have got to deal with this matter urgently with the presiding officer. We must deal with this matter urgently, but the secretary can respond to other issues. Okay, secretary.
Starting with the last question, the secretary did not receive any performance bonus, nor has any staff member, I think, in the year in question. The second one was the first question of the signing of, the performance agreements are ready for both, and I think those are matters, as I'm reporting, that we are seized with, and I quite agree, with the honourable members and the sentiments of the committee in this regard, that this is a matter that we'll look at with the chairperson and the speaker in order to make sure that it's finalized.
I see the two hands and okay, three hands.
Okay.
Honorable Sheikh.
Thank you, Chair. I asked in terms of the accommodation at all the parliamentary villages. Where Parliament, do you pay? Who owns those properties? Is it under Public Works and that kind of thing? And also importantly, Chair, at some stage, if we can get a report as to what is our total travel cost and how much we pay to different, we're able to even use the services of other airlines and claim that money might cost you 700 Rand. So maybe we need to look at that, and why not a dedicated travel agent like Parliamentary Travel who do a fantastic job. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. You know what? I believe that in one of the meetings we dealt with the issues relating to travel. It can be maybe updated information. So what the members are raising should be updated information. And then, Honorable Shah.
Chairperson, referring to the matter of the performance agreements, etc., there must be compliance to the Act, point one. Secondly, that the leadership, the two co-chairs, get into a discussion with the executive authority, and that there's a report at the next meeting.
Thank you. With that, Honorable Steenhuisen.
Yeah, thanks very much. But with respect, the Act says that those two individuals are accountable to this committee. And so I respect that you have an engagement with them, but that's fine. But I think that there's been a material non-compliance with this legislation, which we tasked with overseeing and ensuring that it's implemented. I would like to suggest that they appear before this committee so they can take us personally through the reasons why there's been a failure of compliance with the legislation that we tasked with overseeing.
Okay, thanks. Well, initially when we defined the role of the committee, we did say, where possible, the presiding officers will join committee and deal with issues broadly that they would like to share with the committee. So I want to believe that there is no contradiction from the suggestion that the co-chairs should as well deal with this matter with the presiding officers, and also we should seek presiding officers dealing with some matters, including this one, in the committee where possible. Thanks. I'm a bit worried about time. There are more questions that are coming, and then.
No, Chair, I was going to propose that.
Honorable Singh.
I was going to propose closure because the meeting was set from 9 to 12, and that
Yes.
all other outstanding matters be set down for the
We,
next
we
meeting.
close for any
Sine
other
die.
questions. We
Sine
allow
die.
just to wrap up. No additional question, no follow-up. We allow the secretary now to wrap up on the responses. Thanks.
Thank you very much, co-chairs. The question of accommodation and the accommodation of members is owned by Public Works. It's maintained by Public Works. It's managed by Public Works wholly and totally. The precincts of Parliament are owned by Public Works, and the maintenance thereof is Public Works. We do the management thereof, and when there has to be services that are provided, it's through Public Works. That's why the Speaker and the Chairperson in their last budget speech, they indicated that they would want to see a situation where ownership of all of those properties comes on the side of Parliament. So we are engaging with Public Works to make sure that Parliament gets ownership of the precinct and the accommodation areas.
Okay. Thanks very much, Secretary. As Mr. Honorable Waters says, ke a leboga. Yeah, that's a good one. And then, thanks. Very key issues have been flagged on the third quarter report. They will be reflected on our report, on the committee report. And some of the areas, there are specific time frames that are proposed on some of the issues, the agency that they are required to be handled. And also, Secretary, I think the issue that relates to efficiency in the committee that members raised on the committee tools of trade is quite a matter that requires agency, that we deal with the issue too, because there are quite a number of complaints that we normally come up from committee secretaries and as well as the executive secretaries with regard to issues that relate to whether cell phones or toner. Those, I think we must resolve these issues. As you have said, that policy provides a guide in how we deal with these issues so that they should not be repeatedly raised. And I think all members, I want to thank all members, the co-chair, to have found time dealing, of course, with a committee that has time frames to report back into Parliament. And I want to appreciate all members also who are also serving in that committee, who make themselves available to this important meeting today to consider the third quarter. And I also see Honorable Member Shope Sitole, who serves in the Appropriations Committee, but find time to join us here. Much appreciated. And thanks very much, Honorable Members, for this session and the Secretary. Obviously, we'll have an opportunity, all the issues that are on the agenda are deferred for the next meeting. We'll also have opportunity to just flag some of the issues when you consider the report arising out of this meeting. Thanks the most. The meeting is adjourned.